So this is clearly a very important topic for us to tackle today, that of the role of directors in small companies, and mainly for us as business advisors in advising them. So welcome Jabu, Alan, Clive, David, Geordie, Grace, John, Lynn, nice to see you, Niku, here too, Pilate, Tarai, some familiar names, some new ones. Terence, I think Terence is always the first one to sign into the webinar on a webinar day. Vumile, Wendell, welcome everyone, whether you are an IBASA member or not. Welcome to this IBASA and DPI webinar, which is part of our series of webinars that we do every month for the purpose of empowering us as business advisors, mentors, coaches, facilitators, trainers in dealing with small business clients. Of course, it's a challenging job working with small businesses and offering them some value so that they can succeed in their endeavors to create good business, to create jobs, and to contribute to the economy. So we, in fact, have a very important task that we are assigned in working with small businesses and entrepreneurs. So today, by the way, my name is Christoph Westhuizen. I'm from the Entrepreneurial Planning Institute. I'm in the room with quite a few people. I'll introduce them just now, including some experts in the field of governance and the whole thing about directorships and how we are obliged as directors, in fact, to do certain things and that we can land in deep trouble if we don't. So if I may just kick off, before I introduce the panelists, ask that you make use of the chat area. I see some have already done so. Tabisile and so on, thank you for introducing yourselves there. You may use that chat area to say where you're from and what your speciality is in business advising. We've found in the past that people have connected afterwards in supporting each other in projects if they know where they can find experts from within our community. So if you could just type there, if I can ask, we are 53 people in the room right now, so let's see if we can get 50 people typing where you're from and what your focus area in business advising is. So I already see Gordon says he's from Springbok. Welcome from there, from the Northern Cape. I hope the flowers are nice now. Maybe you can send us a pic. Yeah, just type there in the chat. By the way, if you don't know where to find the chat, there's a button that says chat with a little speech bubble. Click on that and it will open a window. And you can type in there where you're from and what your specialty is. Thanks, Alan. We see you from Johannesburg. So that we just get a sense of who's in the room and what the things are that you are focusing on in business advising. By the way, throughout the webinar, you can keep on using the chat area to type in there what you would like to say, express in terms of the topic, and we can have the discussion going on there too. However, if you want us to address a question, there's another button that you must hit, which is the Q&A button. So maybe you can open that too now and just see that you have that window open. So if there's a question that you would like us to discuss in the webinar, click that, please. Okay, so our first poll is on professional body membership, and I'm launching that now. I'm going to ask that you, as we get used to how these things work, there should be appearing a window with you now where you can participate in the poll and where you can say which of these professional bodies you are a member of. And at this point in time, of course, IBASA is streaking ahead as the clear winner there, but there's some other associations that people are also members of. So please keep voting there. We will come back to the poll just now. But if I can, in the meantime, say that in the room we've got Vinod Kalicharan, who some of you may know as the chairperson of IBASA's Gauteng Regional Association. He's also, by the way, involved with the Institute of Directors. We also have Vikeshni Vandayar in the room from the Institute of Directors of South Africa, or rather Southern Africa, correction there, where she focuses on compliance, legal specialities, writing of articles for publication on these governance issues, and also playing a role in advocacy around governance issues. She, of course, as most people in governance nowadays, know quite a bit about the King 4 approach to governance, as well as what the legal requirements are. Therefore, she's also a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg on these issues. And we also have Daryl Clayton in the room, who I met at the AGM last two weeks ago. He's a certified business advisor with IBASA, and has up to recently been a regional sales director after Point. But focusing now more and applying his 20 years of experience in starting businesses and helping others. And he's found that governance is a challenge and has developed some ways of dealing with that with small businesses. So we're also looking forward to hearing from Daryl around the practicalities of introducing these ideas to small businesses. In the room, we'll also have Joseph Chiwilo, the IBASA CEO, and Teddy Mapuvera from IBASA's office, as well as myself from the API, and Carl Venter, who's the producer of the webinar. So thank you, Carl, for looking after everything there in the background. But let's jump into this topic. Just before we do so, I'm going to end the poll. And we have 69% in fact, of participants today saying that they are members of IBASA. There are some that are not a member of any professional body. We would say prioritize becoming one, because that's clearly important in the way that we go about in servicing our clients. And then a good percentage, sort of between 3 and 6%, 11%, some other bodies that people are members of. So clearly, because this is the IBASA event, most of us are IBASA members. So thank you for sharing that with us. It also gives us a sense that IBASA members are generally not only members of IBASA, but perhaps also a member of another professional body, which is absolutely great because it allows us to learn from the different disciplines that we're involved in. Okay, so if I can ask that the panelists just quickly switch their cameras on so that we can all see who they are. Thanks, Daryl, Vicky, and Vinod, if you can do so too. Because Vinod, we can ask you to speak just now. If you can find the button of the camera, let's see. If I ask you to start your video, that will help. There you are. Great stuff. So there's our whole panel in the room. I'm going to ask Vinod if you can kick off for us. Why is this such an important topic for us as business advisors to get to know more about?
Good morning to everybody, and to my panelists, Vicky Vandia and Daryl Clayton, and members of the EPI. I think this has been a topic we've been discussing for a while now, Christoph, and thanks for putting this together. Corporate governance and directorship and ethics has all become very topical issues in our newspapers of state-owned enterprises and corruption and whatever it may be. I think the objective of our discussion here today is to get an idea or a view of what is directorship, what is the role of directorship, what does it mean to be serving as a director in terms of the legalities, the compliance, and things like that. And I think most of all, for us as an Institute of Business Advisors, to be able to inform our members of the issues that they need to look out for in terms of advising clients, SMMEs, or bigger enterprises, whatever it may be, in terms of their corporate governance. And those are the issues that I think is actually creating a lot more challenges for a lot of SMMEs. By not complying, they're actually not becoming more effective, and they're actually in some ways prejudicing themselves for funding and donor funding and whatever funding, and even like an organization like IBASA for membership, So for me, I just believe that we can just share more knowledge with our members, empower our advisors more. And I think that my two panelists who are really experts, which I'm fortunate to have here, will definitely be able to spell out a lot more about what is required of us as BAs. Thank you.
Great stuff. So Vinod, if you don't mind, we'll ascribe you the role of keeping an eye on the chat and participating there so we can actually keep feeding some information into that as well. So please do participate in the chat if you have a comment to make. And if you note something that you would like to ask, please add that to the Q&A. Just hit that Q&A button and the window will pop up. You can put your question. So if you can please just keep an eye on those, then we make it productive in answering those questions towards the end of the webinar too.
Thanks, Christoph.
Yeah, cool. So let's see how active we are in this field already. I'm going to launch another poll. So some of you battled to actually find the first poll, but there's a window that you need to just click on, and you'll see the poll coming up there. The question here is, do clients engage? How often do they engage with you around director roles in the companies that they're involved in? So how often do you get questions that you need to address? How often are you asked for advice or to find something to support your clients in around directors, the role of directors in the company? So I know that some may be CCs, but it may also apply to them in terms of their roles as members, although CCs are being phased out. The role of directors, our clients asking us questions. So how often does that happen with you? Yes, about every month. Yes, occasionally, hardly ever. No, never. If you can vote there. And it's quite interesting to say that there are very few of us that says yes about every month. So perhaps there's not a big demand coming from our client base, which is indicative of a lack of understanding of what governance is about. And there's a big challenge for us as professionals. I see Daryl is nodding his head when I say that, because he's taking that message to his clients quite effectively. And I'm looking forward specifically, Daryl, to hear what you say about how that practically works. But occasionally we do, most of us, in fact, about half of us, 45%, say that we are about occasionally getting these questions. So there's an indication that people are asking questions around that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll so we can move on. So this just gives us I'll just share the result with you too, so you can see how people voted there. But let's get into the substance. So the Vikeshni is the Institute of Directors. Now that sounds quite a mouthful. Some of us may not know what the Institute is doing, Vikeshni. So I'll ask you maybe to clarify that for us too. But I know you've got a whole presentation to show us with lots of details. And maybe ask Vikeshni if you switch on your sound. Can we share that presentation with participants here today?
Yes, you can.
Okay, because that's always a question, so you don't have to ask that question. We'll people that are on the call today will receive by email the presentation that shares the information. So you don't have to frantically take notes to make sure that you are staying abreast. So I see Carl's already loaded the presentation. So I'll hand over to you, Vicky, and please note your questions as we go along, so we can allow Vicky good time to explain the topic for us. But it is important that we address the practical questions that people have too. So please note that in the Q&A. So Vicky, if I can give over to you. So can you help us here, please?
Perfect. Thanks, Christoph. Good afternoon, I think, everyone attending today. I'm just going to give you a very high-level overview of some of the things that you should consider from a directorship perspective, and I'll also give you some avenues of where you can get further information as well. So I think we can go to the next slide, Carl. So a lot of people ask who can be a director. And actually, there's no legal requirements. Anyone can be a director. So I can finish off university and I can start serving. There's no requirements as to the profession, a designation, qualifications. There's nothing prescribing that. So anyone can be a director. And that's probably where some of our problems may stem from. However, the Companies Act specifically does provide for certain categories or types of individuals who are ineligible or disqualified. It also provides companies with the opportunity to specifically state in their memorandum of incorporation other grounds of disqualification and or specific qualifications they will want in order for a person to serve as a director. And that's quite important because a lot of people actually forget or don't put this information in their MOIs, which is your legal public document. So let's look at who is ineligible or disqualified. So most of these items actually require a court of law order. So you either were prohibited by a court to serve, and you're ineligible if you're a juristic person, if you're an unemancipated minor, so in other words, you don't have the legal authority to act on your own, or if you don't meet any of the qualifications set on the MOI. So pretty easy. You've got to be a natural person to serve as a director. Then disqualified. Again, here, it's a court that needs to decide this. Either you have been declared delinquent or prohibited from serving, you are an unrehabilitated insolvent, you're either prohibited by a public regulation, you've been removed from an office of trust on the grounds of misconduct for dishonesty, and the list goes on. So there are avenues in which you can disqualify a person. However, you've got to go through the court system to get this actually formalized. And in order for then that person's name to go onto the disqualified or delinquent directors register, which the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission keeps, that you can access via their website. So that's an important thing, just as a side to note when appointing individuals and doing background checks, that you actually go to that register to actually make sure that individual is not on there and you're not appointing somebody that actually has been disqualified. So how do we deal then with our expectations and conduct of a director? If we don't have any set legal requirements as to who can be a director, we've got to look at the standard of conduct. So your standard of conduct have always been there in our common law, and through the court cases, our fiduciary duties and duty of care has arisen. With the Companies Act in 2008, it codified a lot of these common law requirements. So you can refer there to section 75 and 76. I will go into some detail on these duties in the next slide. We also then have our King reports. So this is one of the roles that the King reports play within South Africa, is it sets the standard of behavior and conduct expected of the board. I know we all refer to it as corporate governance, but effectively it's telling the board, this is what the standard of conduct we expect from you. This is what you should be doing from a governance perspective. These are the things you should be looking at in your board meeting and considering when you're setting policies and making decisions. We then look at your specific knowledge, qualifications, skills, and competencies. Again, nothing set in legal law. However, your organization can set it specific to you. We also have from us a director competency framework that individuals can use when setting their own criteria. And you've got King 4 that sets out some individual characteristics and gives you guidance and composition. So if we look at the characteristics. So principle 1 talks about ethical characteristics that individuals should have. This is integrity, competence, accountability, responsibility, fairness, and transparency. So we define it as iCraft. So these are 6 characteristics that you should be looking at as an individual director, and your performance should be measured against these characteristics. We then also look at composition. So the guidance provided in King 4 is when you're looking at appointing individuals in your nomination process, you should be looking at, firstly, what skills and knowledge do you have on the board? And what do you need? So this requires obviously a continuous assessment of your skills because businesses are forever changing. So what you might need in this period of time, you may need something else. For example, IT is a growing governance area, and there's a growing need now to have IT specialists on board members, as board members. There's also a requirement here that says proposed candidates should actually be giving statements to the company as to their current professional or directorship status. So how many directorships do they hold? Can they put in a statement that they actually have the time available to fulfill their roles and responsibilities expected? So these are all mechanisms to counter having individuals on a board which actually doesn't have the capacity to deal with their obligations. You should also be doing background checks and also verifying qualifications. Some of these steps are often neglected when individuals go through the nomination process. Then post-nomination, board inductions are very important because in order to have your director to be an effective individual, they need to be able to be inducted properly to understand the needs of the organization, understanding the operations, given some training, especially if they're new and they don't have any experience. Training then is very important because this is how we're going to explain to the individual what's expected of them and ensure that they actually carry out their roles and responsibilities. And then also evaluate. We should be continuously evaluating our board and individual members' performance. With regards to our competency framework, you can access that on our website, and I have given some information on our last slide that you can then go and have a look at that. So if we go to our next slide, Carol. So what are your director duties? Because as I've said now, there's no qualifications. So how do you ensure the companies that you serve comply with the obligations that they need to do? Because what I need to remind, I think, everyone is that if you breach a duty, there is criminal and liable sanctions, civil sanctions for that liability. So there is personal liability here that's attached. You can go to jail for this. You can be fined. So it's important for them to understand these duties and ensure that they comply with it. So let's look at our fiduciary duties. So these are joined together. It's per the Companies Act and per our common law. So there's a duty for you to act in good faith and proper purpose. There's a duty for you to act in the best interests of the company, to avoid conflicts of interest, specifically personal ones, and disclosing them, not to use your position to gain a better advantage. There's also independent act with independent discretion and judgment, to not act within your powers and capacity, not to use your position for gain or advantage or to cause harm. So these things are duties that you can't really get away with. It's quite simple to understand. They're asking you to act with integrity. They're asking you to be ethical in your endeavors as a director. It's asking you to act in the best interest of the organization. And I think that's the key term. In whatever you're doing, you need to be acting in the best interest of a company. Often you have directors that are shareholder representatives or are representing certain constituencies. They need to be able to understand which hat they're wearing at which time. Because when you're in that boardroom, you're acting as a director, therefore you should be looking at what's in the best interest of the company and not necessarily what's in the best interest of the shareholder. So there's an importance to understand that, especially I think in small businesses where the shareholders and directors are the same. How do you manage that? Because you're one and the same people. So they need to find mechanisms in order to break those levels when they're making decisions. Are they looking at it from a shareholder perspective, or are they looking at it from a business perspective? It's difficult, but wearing those different hats, depending on the meetings, is something that needs to be practiced. Then we have a duty of care. This is to act with a degree of care, skill, and diligence that may reasonably be expected from a person carrying out the same function and having the general skills, knowledge, and experience of that director. So this is the test. If something goes wrong, if there is misconduct, the test that's going to be used to benchmark an individual's action is this. And the test or the benchmark is often King 4, or the King Report, which is used in the court. So that's why, even though King 4 may be a voluntary code, there is quite a large importance for you to understand it, because if something does go wrong, this is the benchmark against which you're going to be tested against. Next slide, Carol. So if we look at what contributes towards an effective director, one thing to note, I think somebody also asked previously, so what's the difference between a non-executive and an executive? Most of you may know this already, but a non-executive director is someone who's not involved in the day-to-day operations of the business. Ideally, they should be independent. So in other words, there shouldn't be any link or interest within the organization. And an executive director is somebody that's involved in the day-to-day. An executive director, in the normal sense, if we look at companies, may not necessarily be a board member. So there's a distinction there on whether or not you're actually a board member. In other words, you're registered on the CIPC company documents as a member versus just an executive director that's dealing with the business. There you're part of EXCO. And EXCO is not a board committee. That's a management committee. So there's a difference between those two, and then the governance elements and your company law requirements when they talk about board committees. Board committee is only a committee that's been established by the board in order to assist them in their mandate. The Companies Act also provides, so all of these things I'm talking about when we're saying director, a director is not just somebody that's on the board. A director is also a prescribed officer, so in other words, not a board member. The Companies Act, when it talks about ineligible individuals and also in terms of liability, also talks about somebody who's part of the committee, but also not a member of the board. So there's a bit of a wide ambit. So in your case, if you are dealing with individuals and companies who aren't necessarily board members or directors, it doesn't mean they're exempt from any liability if decisions are made and they're not following these fiduciary duties and looking at the governance standards that are also being set out. So that's quite important, I think, to consider. So what makes an effective director? Some factors, these aren't all, is ensuring they understand their roles and responsibilities. So sometimes I think you may need to advise individuals whether in whatever governance role they play within the organization to understand what's their specific roles and responsibilities, what's expected of them in terms of that organization, what's the governance standards that they should be looking at in implementing within their role. Understanding their liability and risk. So the Companies Act also provides a section for indemnification and director insurance. I'm unfortunately not an expert on the D&O insurance side, but insurance can only be provided for the elements that are provided in which a company can indemnify somebody. So it's not just for anything. And if you're taking up a role in this ranking, you should be asking and questioning whether or not there is D&O insurance in place to protect you if something does go wrong, or at least cover some of your expenses if you need to be in a legal dispute. There is an FAQ that's available on our website that deals with D&O from CAMARG, so you can have a look at that if you want to look for further information. Our details are on the last slide. Then there's continuous professional development. So just because you're a CA, just because you're a lawyer, just because you have a designation doesn't mean you have the abilities and competencies to act in a role as a director. It requires a different mind shift because we're not being operational. We're looking at it from an outside perspective, it's strategic. You're looking at it from an oversight and monitoring. So there is a shift from going in an operational side in the business to moving into a boardroom. So there is a need for continuous professional development. And this is where some of the ID services can assist you with this, which I'll go into a bit later. And also a need for CPD. You need to be kept informed, either on your own accord or through the own company, providing experts in board meetings to educate you on current matters and risks that you should be considering. Such as IT, infrastructure, digital movements in business. These are things that you need to understand, not being experts, but understand it enough in order for you to be able to question the information that comes in your board pack. And then lead by example, our king concept of ethical and effective leadership. This sits with the board and your directors at the top. They need to lead by example. Now, you can't have ethical without effective. You can be an ethical board and do all the right things, but if you're not effective in carrying out your policies and standards that you expect throughout the organization, we don't have good leadership. You can't be effective without being ethical at the same time. So there's a combination of both that's needed in order to have a good governance structure. And even having all the best governance structures doesn't mean nothing can go wrong, by the way. It's not always, it's a mitigation factor that will help you decrease the risk, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to, it's not zero tolerance. Having the necessary then competencies, characteristics, and level of experience to carry out the role. So in this case, if you're looking at, so somebody said that they were looking at going into taking up some NED roles. So here, consider what would be needed of you. How could you educate yourself and get the competencies that are required? And this is also a way the Institute of Directors can also assist you in this manner. So next slide, please. So just a bit.
Yeah, if I can just jump in there, Vicky, quickly. I don't see many questions emerging. So it's either you're doing such a great job that no one has any questions, or we haven't figured out how to post the questions. But please do put the questions on. When you said jail time, I thought, oh gosh, sort of what would put you in jail? So maybe that is a question for us to address. I was also thinking, sort of as business advisors, sometimes we get asked, would you perhaps be able to serve as a director? So there's kind of two questions I think that we can already kind of park for discussion later on. But if you can very quickly run us through what the Institute of Directors does. I think you've covered most of the content now, have you?
Yes, yeah. This is just a very quick.
Just in half a minute, run us through what it does and how we can access resources through the Institute before we move on to the next segment.
Perfect. So just as business advisors, I thought maybe it'd be important for you to know how we can help you in what you're doing. But just briefly, we are a professional body recognized by SACWA. We're a non-profit company, and we're here to promote corporate governance and enhance the credibility of directorship. And what's important is that we're not a regulator. So we don't have powers to remove directors or investigate director misconduct. I think that's often a misconception that because we're called the Institute of Directors, we have the powers to actually do all things and correct the issues that are currently happening in companies. Unfortunately, we don't. All we can do is influence, provide the guidance through our King reports and guidance, provide the training that we do, and try and influence changes in legislation to take into account some of these governance requirements and protect some director interests. We are the secretary and conveners of the King Committee, and we produce and own the King reports. So that's just a general idea of us. So how we can help you. Next slide. I think we jumped backwards there. Next one. Thank you. So how we can help you. As business advisors, all our publications are freely available to the public. So if you go onto our website under governance, you will find an array of guidance topics from King 4 practice notes, general guidance, research topics that are all available there for you for use. So please use them, forward them to whoever you need to. Use it in your consultations with the companies that you're with. They're there and freely available. We also then offer director development trainings. So this can be anything. It's open programs, customized. We can come into your board or even in your meeting, do little snapshot sessions for you, board appraisals, that's performance evaluations, and then specific advisory services. So for example, governance assessments or trying to understand where the company currently is in their governance journey to where they need to be, to reviewing your board charters and policies. And then we offer these designations, which I think might be of interest to you, is we offer a certified director designation and we offer a chartered director designation. Now, these are the mechanisms in which we're trying to promote directorship as a profession. We're trying to educate and make sure those that sit on the boards have the necessary expertise in a way. Certified director is based purely on training. You come for training, you write MCQs, and you write an exam. It's knowledge-based. Anybody can come and do a certified director. Chartered director, however, requires experience. So it requires you to actually have a portfolio of evidence to show that you've done certain things and you meet that competency requirement. And then in conclusion, last page, we're skipping. In conclusion, I've listed here some papers that you can go access on our website that will give you a lot more detail on what I've covered in a very high level manner. And then also my contact details if you need any further information or you'd want to contact me for anything going forward.
Great. We won't let you go yet. So there's still question time. I see some are Jabu, Irashan, Tabisila. Thanks for the questions that you started posting there. So please guys keep adding the questions so that we can address those too. Thank you very much, Vikeshni, for the thorough covering of the scene and, sort of the Companies Act and King 4, sort of, I think there's maybe more for us to understand about how those two work together. But let's move forward. So already getting a sense, sort of, so there's the IOD, the website address. In fact, it's in the chat there too, iodsa.co.za, and all of those resources are there. So please go and have a look there and find more things like insurance, sort of liability insurance, practical stuff for ourselves to consider too. Yeah, so let's before we go on to Daryl on a practical perspective on working with SMEs around these issues, let's ask ourselves what it is that we reckon we need some more to learn about. What training? So if IBASA is to offer some training, maybe with EPI and the Institute of Directors help, what would you, there are 4 things there, okay, there may be more. In fact, you can even add more in the chat if we're not covering what you would want to see training in there. So there in the poll, you can indicate what it is that you have the most pressing need on to get some more training or information around. And people are kind of voting. It looks like training of directors in fulfilling their duties is kind of the leading one. So, sort of how can we understand it? How can we get the training and then pass on that information to our clients, or perhaps get our clients to attend training on fulfilling the duties of directors? Seems to be the one winning the race there, but the others are also getting some support. So let's see, about 70% of us are saying training of directors in fulfilling their duties is the most important, followed by 50% saying how to appoint effective directors. So I've learned a few things there, that there's a website that you can actually go and look whether people are delinquent or not, whether they've been listed as delinquents. They can't serve on directors. I didn't know that existed. But let's move on to Daryl. So Daryl, if I can ask that you unmute yourself. You've been working a bit in bringing these concepts and requirements to small businesses, and I've found that certain things work and some don't. So from your experience, how would you guide us in making this an effective endeavor for us as business advisors?
Okay, thanks. I think Vakishni covered a lot of the high-end requirements of what directors should be doing and how they can be trained. And myself, I've been through the majority of trainings at the Institute of Directors as a member, and I highly recommend it for any of our clients that can put directors through that sort of training. But more specifically, I think I'm going to allude to the fact that business advisors probably should do the training themselves. Thanks. We're moving on to the slides. Thank you. So what I've covered here is it's all done a little bit, I would say, tongue in cheek, but it's to make a point. And as business advisors, I'd ask for our clients to keep them legal. They need to understand all of the principles of King. They need to understand the different acts that apply, and there's many. And the question is, should we train our clients on all this legal knowledge and principles of governance knowledge? The answer is yes, we should. But the real question is it possible, and is it likely to happen? And the answer is no. You've got to be real. The next question is, business advisors, can they train in all the acts to assist clients? Again, yes, it's possible, but not likely to be able to cover everything. So the next question I'd have is, can they specialize in certain acts? And now you get a bit closer to what I have found is more realistic, to be able to have certain advisors who can go and take small companies through the process of what they need to meet specific goals of governance. The one point I'd make is, in the realms of what we talk about as business advisors, clients that are mainly in the small to medium enterprise. So we have a range of clients that have come up as mum and pop entrepreneurs. Their focus has always been about product, etc., and not so much about good administration. So it's not like bringing people who've come on board as directors. It's like converting business people who've come from a product-based background through to compliance and conformance regimes. Just at the bottom of this one, if you can see, I put down the bottom to break it down for these small clients. We need to take each area of governance and compliance and put it in a format that is simple for them to do, quick for them to do, that a business advisor particularly can help them pull apart and give them an understanding of where the risk lies. And that makes it easier to identify the real risk and get them to manage those first rather than everything at once. The example I've got there is, you take the one point of governing risk, and within governing risk you've got I've listed IT, HR, legal as just three of the many. You've got strategy, finance, marketing, accounting, ops, procurement, other areas that you need to identify risk. If you break that down, and this is where the business advisors, if they prepare a set of questions to show the clients what we mean as far as governing risk, so they do not understand what the question should be. So if you put the question to them like, where is all your data stored for IT? Do you have a backup and how often? With their answers, you can effectively show them the highest risk and what it could do to their business and profitability and risk to stakeholders. And from that, you can make a plan how to address. So we need to be able to have questions that take the learnings at the top end of directorship and give a way for the entrepreneur and mum and dad businesses to answer simplistic questions that answer to the big questions of governance and compliance. Okay, I put this one point up here regarding the price fixing scandal of 2015. You can see the fines were 99 million to $1 billion for collusion price fixing. The evidence suggested annual price fixing had occurred from 1995. So not in 2015, but from 1995 onwards. And collusion on closure of bakeries was also evident. Okay, evidence was the annual bread price increases for the group were within weeks of each other. Additionally, this looked like the middle management of the fined companies met to talk about pricing each year. So I'd say the question is, did the directors of each company know what was taking place? And if not, would the directors be any less liable? Well, whether they knew about it or not, the liability still remains because the director's role is to control and push the training of compliance and the understanding through the organisation. So liability is still there. So ignorance is not a defence. Could the fines have been less? Now, this is an interesting question, specific. If you look at court cases where the judges have, and I think as Vikesh alluded to, they might refer to, was it principles of King followed? Did you have good governance in place? Now, to the answer of the question, could the fines have been less? Yes, they could have. If there was enough documentation in place to show due diligence on why a discussion may have occurred and if it was legal or if it was checked and assessed to be legal or not, what the risk of that was, if all of that was in place, even if they had made the wrong decision, the more evidence that they had tried to meet and understand the real obligation, the real liabilities. So long as that was in place, the courts will look at it and say, well, due diligence was done. It didn't work. It was the wrong answer. But there is a question on, did the company outright go for collusion, or did they test the theories to come up incorrect and make the wrong decision? Now, it's always going to be wrong. It's always going to be a court case for a collusion case. But it is shown in a number of cases that the more documentation of due diligence that each company has to show that there was an assessment of risk and good governance was in place, the lower the impact on those companies. So it's very important that with our clients, when we talk to them about getting into the field of good directors, good documentation on what they're doing with decisions right now can, by default, lead them into good governance. And we can take it from there. Okay.
So Darryl, are you saying from a practical perspective that better be prepared, so if you attend to those governance issues outright, should something emerge in the future that's problematic, it's just the fact that you've done that would count in your favor. Even if it goes to court, it will count in your favor. And because you had those measures in place. If you don't, you probably would be in trouble.
Yes, it will count in your favor. It will not negate the decision, but it will count in your favor about what the result may be from that.
Yeah. So maybe as a last point, Daryl, from a practical perspective, when you engage with small businesses around corporate governance, what do you find helps in getting them to quickly move to the point where they see the benefit of spending time, effort, even money on sorting it out?
It's by looking at each client and what area they're involved in, and having knowledge as business advisors of where we would know that the most risk exists, and use that to start to take the principles of governance and ask the right questions and come out with some conclusions that, in the case of IT, okay, if we don't put a backup system in, our system down for a week, we could lose clients worth hundreds of thousands, or we could put the business in financial difficulty, so all stakeholders would be negatively affected. So they can start to understand simply that if they don't look at it, they won't recognise the areas of risk and be able to address it.
Okay, great. So is there a final thing you wanted to cover, or can we move on to questions?
You can move on to questions.
Yeah. Okay, great stuff. So that gives us quite a mouthful, by the way, sort of for us to digest just like that. But I see we've got some questions to address. So I want to show you something caught your eye already, Vinod, that you think we should jump onto first. You must let me unmute you.
Yeah, which one is that, Christoph?
Any of the questions that you saw or comments that you would like to make for us to focus on first?
No. No, I think that those questions have been answered already about the directors. I think the one that I'm also interested in is whether any SMME sector director has been jailed or whatever it may be. Maybe that's an interesting one.
Okay, so I see Daryl referred to a case of the bread companies. By the way, I neglected to say that Daryl is also a professional baker. That's correct, Daryl?
Yes, that is correct. So I have some knowledge there.
Yeah, okay. Is that a case of someone was jailed or came close to jail? Or maybe, Vicky, you've got an example. This is scare tactics sometimes work. We had in Cape Town where they said the water is going to run out and everyone started saving water. So, sort of sometimes it works to get people to do the right stuff. Vicky, let me just unmute you. Okay. Well,
my side, I don't know specifically if the cases were in regards to small businesses, but there are some case studies in which, or case laws which directors were found accountable and liable. There is a list of summaries of some of them in our director duties paper. I provided the link in the answer on the Q&A.
Okay, great. And Daryl, are there some that you're aware of?
No, I think on a number of sessions with some legal companies, it's commented that no, it has not been so effective in bringing about putting directors in jail. But if we look at what's happening in the environment over the last 5 years, I don't think it's inevitable. I think it will come, and we're getting stronger on that.
Okay, great. But let's look at some of the questions. Carl, just maybe if you can put it on speaker view, then it looks like the spotlight is on me. I don't mind, but maybe we can look at the person speaking rather than scratching my nose. So questions. Tabisile is asking, do you guide small businesses in selecting a board for itself? I think that's directed at the IOD.
So we won't necessarily help you select the board, but what we do offer is you can advertise vacancies via us to our members, and we do this for free for nonprofits and small businesses. So we can help you at least advertise it to our member base. We don't, however, vet the individuals, but you can drop me a line and we can see, if there is a need in terms of helping you put together a skills matrix or your criteria. Maybe we could possibly help you with that.
Great stuff. Sorry guys that I'm sitting here occupying the video. We'll get Carl to sort out that little technical thing for us just now. Okay, let's move on to the next one. What is the difference between, so you spoke about executive, non-executive directors, but then we sometimes also refer to board members. So what is this thing, director, executive director, and board member? Is it just a language thing, or are there different categories of directors here?
So the Companies Act doesn't differentiate between executive and non-executive. It just uses the word director. As I explained, an executive is someone that's involved in the day-to-day business, and a non-executive is someone who isn't. A board, so the difference becomes is with your executive, I think the general term we call most directors in a company is executive directors. But it doesn't mean they're board. In other words, it doesn't mean they're actually a director on the board. They're just, they're a director for the company. So they obviously have a level of authority to make decisions and act on behalf of the company. There only would be a director if you registered on the CIPC company form as a director. So this is generally, that's the board we're talking about that holds all of these responsibilities.
Okay, great. So I asked on the panel, Daryl, Vinod, Carl, you two, and Teddy, if there are some of the questions that you think we should focus on first, you can say so. But let's go to the first. The first one is Jabus. I'm keen to assess a risk management matrix template. Is there something that one can find somewhere easily to guide us in doing risk assessments for our clients?
Okay, I'll jump in here. That's interesting because that's part of the comments I've been making, that those sorts of templates are needed. Now, yes, there is a template that I use and a number of colleagues use that breaks down risk into 15 categories, and within those categories it breaks it down to what would the risk be, and then what we do and what I think the Institute of Business Advisors needs to do is then look at all of the questions that you would ask of the small businesses that could give the answers that we need to assess the risk. And that goes back to when they say, what's IT risk? And we have to say, well, do you have a server? Do you have a backup? It's simple questions, but it gives you the answers to be able to identify and say, well, if you don't have a backup, this is the risk you will have. So on risk, yes, there are, but they need to be more available through the institutes if we are to holistically help small to medium businesses.
Okay, great stuff. I see so there are templates and you can search for that. And I'm not sure, Vicky, on your website if there's something like that.
Not really from risk. I would maybe try IMSA's website. They should possibly have something there. We do have, from a public audit committee perspective and audit committee forums, which do sometimes put out some publications. I think we do have in one of our forums some papers on assessment of your risk function or finance function. So there may be something there that might help you.
Okay, great stuff. So Vinod and Carl and so on, also please jump in if there's a question that you want us to focus on first. But I see there's one which is about the number of Terence and Torai both asked this question around the number. Is there kind of an ideal number of directors to serve on a board, specifically considering that a lot of our clients are small businesses? It's maybe even one shareholder, sort of, is there an ideal number of directors?
There isn't an ideal number. I think a research poll that was done a while ago showed on average boards, but I think this is more on the bigger side, is about 10 to 12. But in any company itself, and especially from a small business perspective, your size will be dependent on your operations. It's dependent upon how many individuals do you need to adequately actually manage the oversight function. So you could have 2, you could have 3. You also need to consider if you need committees, which I think some of the small businesses probably wouldn't need legally or a legal requirement to have an audit committee, for example, or a social and ethics committee, then you can have a smaller size. But if you need committees, each of them require 3 members. So you're going to have enough then directors to comply with that requirement. So the size is really dependent on the actual business itself and operations.
Yeah. Okay, if I can, so Carl and Vinod, questions that you want us to address?
Yes, Christoph, I see Jabo's got another question that maybe links to Daryl's presentation on how can we demystify due diligence to encourage the use of risk assessment as a periodical business performance tracking tool for SMEs.
Yeah, well, I think that also goes back to what I'm saying about using a template of questions. Now, if I give one example of something very simple to demystify, and I'm not sure if you will see this in front of me, but that's the King Code, 17 codes. In one instance, I simply took those 17 codes and I put a column on the next side and I asked the questions of each company. I taught them what the codes mean, or principles mean, and then I'd ask them questions regarding what they do. And at the end of it, in a very simplistic form, we had their first governance report. And which amazed them, but you've got a short report. And then I said, right, now, each 6 months, we're going to sit down and measure more against what they're doing. So in a very simplistic way, without scaring them, they did a governance report, which they never, ever thought they could do. And we have to be more about that.
Yeah, so a bit of effort to make it accessible. That's perhaps the answer, and perhaps we can start share these resources so that the tools, So if you do have tools that you found work well in this instance, like what Daryl has mentioned, perhaps in the chat, if you can say where one can find more of that. And before we jump on, we've got 3 more questions, by the way. So with your permission, we may just go over the hour slightly to address those 3 questions. So definitely Dion and we'll get to your questions now. So Vinod, if I can ask you.
Yes, sure.
So which of those would you like to focus on? I see Daphne is asking about indemnity.
Okay, Carl, there is indemnity. I can't seem to get her question here.
But could we revisit the issue of professional indemnity in terms of where and when it is applicable?
Yeah, I think that's an issue that needs to be dealt with. If you are a business advisor, you should be carrying some indemnity, professional indemnity, like Vakeshni alluded to about the directors and officers' insurance. So I think that it's an area that we can look at it personally, and maybe it's an area we need to have a webinar on to explain the advantages, the disadvantages, the pros and cons. Because even although you have a directors and officers indemnity, you can still be held liable if you did not follow the business judgment rule. So it doesn't mean because you got the indemnity, you safeguarded against any misdemeanor or misconduct.
Yeah. Okay, so perhaps there's something liability, indemnity, insurance, that may be a topic for us to tackle in a different webinar. But if we can sign out with one more question, I'll combine Dion and Will's question. So it's about appointment of directors. So you have a small business, there's the issue of control. So the control lies with the board. How does a small business, Will is asking, how can a small business shareholder appoint a director and still have control of the business? And then Dion goes into when someone dies off, how is it that directors remain liable if some other directors are deceased? So, Vicky, if I can direct this to you.
Sure. That's okay.
A hard question to answer. So I think we need to look at what's the role of a shareholder and what's the role of a director. So, and what control do you want to have? The shareholders appoint your directors. So you have control over the appointment and removal of directors if they're doing things outside the ambit upon which you give them. But the point of having those 2 levels is to ensure independence, credibility, in terms of running the business. It's that objectivity. That's why we have these levels. So it depends what you want from a control perspective. Often, if the shareholder is appointing a director, they still have this duty to look at the shareholder interests. So that's often where we say you need to use a different hat. So it depends what you want to achieve there. And then with regards to liability, unfortunately, often things you find out issues after people have gone, and you often then look to the current board who's supposed to be managing the business. So I don't have an answer for that. It's unfortunate. I do believe it's unfortunate that the current individuals who may not have been part of the problem are generally held to account. And that's maybe something from a legal perspective, and our legislators need to look at how we actually hold those that were actually accountable.
Yeah. Great stuff. No, thank you very much.
If I can just jump in there, Carol.
Sure.
Carol, if I can just jump in there, I think one thing that's very important is that if you're going to become a director of a company, ensure that you do your own due diligence on the company itself.
Yes.
So you can go and check out whether that is a company you want to be a director, whether there's some skeletons there or there's issues that weren't there was risk issues that weren't mitigated. So I think you as a director, if you ask to be on be involved with the company or join a board, it is your duty to check that that company is also squeaky. Not only then check, are you out?
And if I can jump in also, when you're making decisions, if you disagree with the decision, you can request to note it in your minutes. That's a mechanism to protect you from a majority vote. If you were against a decision, that can help you if something does go wrong.
Yeah. Great. So normally we don't serve as directors, but Vinod, I want to ask you this question. This is my last question, by the way, before we wrap up. And we can, around the table, just have a final comment on what you reckon we should take away from the discussion here today. But Vinod, so if I, as a business advisor, is asked by a client to serve as a director in the company, what should my response be according to your understanding of best practice?
I actually would decline it. Firstly, I think you're probably too close to the business. Your independence would be a bit challenged. I think from an ethical issue, I think that I would resist it.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion.
Draw the clear lines between being a professional business advisor and those that are carrying the can for the decisions in the company.
Because then you started to carry two hats. You know, and then also your independence as a director, I think, will be challenged. But I'd rather seek that professional advice from Vikeshni, because I think she'll probably be able to give us a better view of my what I just said.
Okay, so let's just go around the table, and I'll ask, before we come to Samibasa, Teddy sharing our Samibasa events and activities and updates. Daryl, what do you reckon we as business advisors should note or take away from our discussion here today?
I think there's a top end to business with the training that would need to be done as business advisors, the IOD and a few other director training programs are available, and that's a necessary start for them. But from small businesses, they will not all go and do directors training. So as business advisors, we need to fill the gap in between and how to translate that. And I think that's where I'd like to see some effort go at IBASA in the future.
Great stuff. So look out for training, empower yourself so you can help your clients. Maybe with the help of IBASA and the IOD and so on. So,
absolutely.
What would you say, Vicky?
Sorry, Christoph.
Sure.
That's just one point I want to finish. Yeah, on coming on here with the panel we had, and with the meeting you the first time at the AGM, I'm from the IOD in respect of that's where I looked at all the work and learned. But the IBASA portion of it was to look and try to seek how to join the information together. And I believe by sitting together as the institutes and say, how do we bridge the gap from top to bottom, we will be more successful. So yes, please do that.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Great stuff. I see Vinod is also shaking his head in agreement. Vikeshni, what would you say we should take away from the discussion today?
I think a lot of the stuff was around governance, and I think what needs to be remembered is King 4 is made to be accessible to everyone, and it's about proportionality. So the recommendations and principles need to be proportionalized for the business. So they don't have to be difficult. I think Dale gave a nice example. If you try, take small steps, small businesses can definitely achieve the end objective.
Yeah. Great. But thank you very much again. So, Carl, I know you were on the buttons mostly today, but you also following the content. Is there something that you would like to note before we get to Vinod?
Hi, Christoph. Yes, I think what I heard today, there's a nice framework from King 4, and I think especially what Bhakeshni just now said, and Daryl also, is start somewhere and build your diligence by showing that you're actually doing something constructive. Don't just, you know, take an ostrich approach and hope it just bypasses you. So I think that's, for me, the bottom line here. It's not undoable. Just start somewhere.
Yeah, with your head in the sand, you won't even see the storm coming. So, Vinod, if you can give us a closing remark here today, please. You started off us about the importance of the topic, so maybe it's opportune for you to also kind of wrap it up for us. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I just want to say a very special thanks to Bhakeshni and to Daryl and to everybody's contribution. I think we've actually opened a can of worms here, because you can see there's a lot more information that business advisors or prospective future directors need to get before they actually take the plunge to advise or to serve.
Yeah.
For me, I really think that it's a topic that I agree with Daryl, sorry, is that we need to maybe build a synergy between IBASA and the Institute of Directors in how we can promote this better directors, better boards, and of course a better country and better well-run organizations. And I think that is what we want to achieve. Thank you.
Great, Vinod. I know you were the driving force behind this topic, so thank you for kind of reminding us that we need to attend to this. Thanks, Daryl, for your contribution, and Bhakeshni, sort of for all the expertise. I hope that people will go visit the IOD's website, because there's clearly lots of resources there for us to, as a starting point, to look at. But let's shift gears quickly onto...
Christoph, what's one more thing, please, if I may?
Yeah.
I just want to also express my sincere thanks to the Institute of Directors for putting them on a spot at such short notice, and Bhakeshni specifically. I think together we can achieve more for our business advisors. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. I'll underline that too. So, IBASA, as one of the professional associations around, has had the AGM 2 weeks ago. Quite an event in Cape Town, had a forum discussion going, even a CPD training event in the morning. So those that were fortunate to be there, it was quite a packed day with lots of interesting stuff happening. We also launched the new IBASA corporate identity, the logo. So if you can see Teddy's picture just now, you'll see there's a new logo behind his head. But Teddy, if we can ask you, what is news in since the AGM or following the AGM? What is news from the IBASA Secretariat and office? You're still muted, so we're trying to unmute you. We can't. There you are. We can only hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Thank you so much, Chris. Panelists, thank you. So we've got wonderful things happening and coming up. One of the things that that the board is committed to from the AGM is to go and launch all the rest of the provinces, including the Free State, I think the KZN, Limpopo, and other areas. So the Institute has committed itself now to go closer to its members, even the people in their districts, areas, so that we can be effective in our business advisory from the grassroots level. So there will be quite a number of launches that will be coming during the course of the year into the opening of our financial year also next year. And for those who have friends, colleagues, acquaintances, I also want to vouch that I think having a business advisor is also important, and I hope it will be also one of the part of the key points on the King 4. and joining and becoming an IBASA member is quite essentially very, very seamless and easy. You can join by going to our website, which is www.ibasa sma.org.za. We've got a form there that you can, an easy to fill form there. And then you can also contact us on our email where we are mostly effective, which is admin@ibasa.org.za. So the exciting news is that now the Institute has committed itself to go to the grassroots level. We are forming districts. I see Carol, our Western Cape chair, they are forming districts there where they are going to the grassroots, and then we'll be having a close up in touch with our members and clients as well for our members.
Yeah, great stuff. So I just placed it in a shortcut there to that form if you can't find it on the website. But otherwise, go to the website, ibasa.org.za, and you'll find the membership application process can start there. Otherwise, in the chat, there's a link that you can click. It will also take you there. So Tabisile, thank you for reminding us that there's also the Eastern Cape. Of course, we've got different regions. So we've got, in fact, Carl is also the chair of the Western Cape region, apart from the role that he's playing with the webinar here. So while we talk about these regional associations and the launching of those and so on, can we perhaps just clarify? So Daryl and Vicky, if you need to go, we'll understand that. So, but please feel free to hang around. So there are a good number of IBASA members on the webinar today. Can we just perhaps between Vinod and Carl clarify what is this thing called the regional association, and if we say going down to the ground like Teddy did now, how does what can we expect as members? Teddy, please, sort of maybe you can lead into that. Sort of what is this regional association thing? But I would like Carl, since we have Carl and Vinod now from the Western Cape and Gauteng on the webinar too, to contribute towards what they think the plans are going forward.
Okay, from the Gauteng regional chapter. What we have planned, or we've already started, is that you have a provincial chapter. So the provincial chapter is a Gauteng, right? So the regional chapters will be.
Looks like we're losing Vinod there. Carl, would you mind?
Not as big as.
Hi, Christoph. Yeah, I sounds like he's got a connection problem. Yeah, just to maybe quickly break it down like that. So we've got a national board of IBASA, and then we have regional associations, which are basically formed around the provincial regions in South Africa currently. We call it regions, but it's basically provinces. And then from the provinces, we naturally have different towns and so on, and that we call chapters. So you'll have a chapter in the Western Cape case, you'll have a chapter in Saldanha municipality, and a chapter in Eden municipality, and a chapter in Bredevuur municipality. But then also what we do is we break down the metros, which are big with lots of members, also into maybe chapters depending on the size. So in Gauteng's case, they've created the Ekurhuleni chapter, and there could be a Tshwane chapter and Johannesburg chapter and so on going forward. In Cape Town, we've done a central Cape Town chapter and a southern suburbs chapter and a northern suburbs chapter and a Helderberg chapter. So that's just because we find people are working together who know each other. So they need to be closer together. That's the ground level, and building up from there up to provincial level, which is the region, and then naturally nationally to the board. Going forward, there's going to be a provincial, what we call charco. So the provincial chapters will fit into a chairmans of regional chapters, and some of them will then also serve on the board. Well, currently all of them serve on the board.
Okay, so I see Vinod is back. Sorry, Vinod, the internet dropped you there for a moment, but maybe you can complete your sentence.
Yeah. Okay. So also the reason for the structure of Gauteng was so that we could get closer to our stakeholders. So let's look at it. We had a project in Tshwane, okay, for SMME mentorship. So through the chapter of Tshwane, we were in the area. chapters, we are able to be closer to our stakeholders and be able to service them a lot easier. That was the whole reason that our structure came about like that.
Okay, great. I just muted your video there so that we could hear you.
Okay.
But perhaps we can ask Terry for us to end off the webinar today here. As a member, she spoke about all these structures and sort of levels and so on. As a member, how do I engage now?
Okay. As a member, it is simple. The first thing is, okay, let me start from a non-membership point of view. If you are not a member and you are so much interested, email us to admin@ibasa.org.za. As a member, like what Vinod and Carol stated, within our structure, we always have representatives even to the grassroots level, including your district. So there will be all those representatives in your area where you'll be able to share ideas as members, have a forum of discussion, a panel of discussion of things that are happening on the ground, and even issues that might need to be raised so that they can be part of a policy or can be a motivation for a legislation, since we also need this area to be regulated, the business as advisory fraternity. So as in your area, there will be need for you to be in a constant in touch with your district representative, your regional representative, in everything. Like what Carol said, and escalation will be done even up to the regional to the charcoal, where most of the guys they sit on the board and they can have influence in legislation, the fraternity. So from what you can see, you'll see that the board is trying by all means to make sure that the people who are being advised and the business advisor are very much in close in terms of communication and in terms of influencing the environment and the policy. So they are working so hard so that this space needs to be regulated, and the the Institute of Business Advisor who will be in the near future the custodian of the regulation of this. So far, we are the custodian of the SAQA of the business advice designation with SAQA. So we also need the area to be regulated, but there must be a close link between the people who are working on the grassroots and the people who are working in the high level in terms of those people who affect regulations, the government, and also and so forth.
No, great. Thanks for giving us that perspective. So it's up to us as the practitioners on the ground working with the client to make sure that when those regulations come, that it's influenced by us, that it meets our requirements, that it's not kind of a centrally conceived idea, but that so there's the obligation on us to actually get involved on those levels. So thank you very much, everyone. We are looking forward to our next webinar on the 25th of October. The topic of that webinar will be what ESD managers in corporations are looking for when they appoint service providers to do business development services for them. And of course, we're all looking for more business. So maybe that's something to attend to, that webinar, to hear from the perspective of the buyers of enterprise supply development services, what they're looking for, so we can be prepared for that. So thank you. Have a great rest of Wednesday. I'm not sure about you. I'm actually off to the science center with the kids. It's holidays, school holidays. So, sort of also parents, different roles that we play. So have a productive Wednesday if you're going to work still, and the rest of the week. Hope it's all panning out good for you and your clients. Stay well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.